Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hi, everybody. This is Cynthia Toolin-Wilson, and I'm here with my radio show, Author to Author. Tonight, we're going to talk to Thom Brucie, and he wrote an excellent novel called Children of Slate. Thom, would you like to start us with a prayer?
Yes, thank you. Well, Lord, we ask that what we say and how we behave reflects you in our lives. We ask that this interview bless those who hear it, bring some who are ready closer to you. In Jesus' name we ask that. Amen.
Amen. So, Thom, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
I write fiction and poetry. I consider myself more a storyteller than a pure poet. My poetry tends to be story guided, if you would. I think that story is an aspect of the intimacy of human relationship. It's how we really talk to one another. And I like telling stories. I have ever since I was a young boy.
That's good. So where did you get the idea to write the story about a seminarian?
Oh, I was in a seminary when I was younger for 4 years, minor seminary, and some of the experiences of that's a pretty unusual experience, I think. At least I haven't met a whole lot of people who've had that same experience. And, over the years, one reflects on circumstances that play significance in our interpretation of reality. How do we look at what's happening around us, and what does it mean, and what can I do about it? And I wanted to write a story about miracle in contemporary culture. I sometimes feel very strongly that the Lord wants to make miracle. That's his job. We wake up with teachers or carpenters, wherever we are. He wakes up every morning. Maybe he doesn't sleep, but his thing is, let me do some miracles. Right. Who's out there ready, who needs something, and that's his energy, the force of his grace. And I wanted to write a book that would offer some thoughtful possibility that all of us are tools of God's action in the physical plane. And so I thought that a seminary, a monastery place, geography, would be supported by a reader as a place where someone could study and think about and talk about that kind of philosophical, theological coordination. And that's what kind of led to how I approached that aspect of the desire to tell a story about miracle.
Yeah, the setting is a great one, just because when you think, as you say, there's not a lot of people who've gone through seminary, but I think that the experience of everyone in seminary is very different, so I'm a seminary professor and a seminary administrator. So my experience of it, I can see or imagine what seminarians are going through. I can see some of what they're going through. I can see what the sisters are like. But every one of us has our different experience of it. So I think that choosing this one young man, Morgan, to give his experience is really a good move. It gives us really an intense view of what that was like for him. So what you're saying makes sense to me. Okay. So would you like to kind of develop the story, starting with the winter in Chapter 1?
The overview of the book is in 4 parts. Winter, spring, summer, and fall. And of course, it's the cycle of life, the life, death, and resurrection of the earth, and the life cycle, and the life, death, and resurrection of Morgan's understanding of the miraculous. One of the things one of the reasons that he leaves the seminary at the end is that he recognizes not everyone has to be in robe to be in touch with the miraculous, and that's kind of the point I wanted to make, that all of us are, all of us can be used if we just have the willingness to learn how to allow it. So the book opens with his dilemma. He's in a seminary, and he's met this girl, and so that frustrates him because his training and life prior to this formalized education is that a priest is celibate, and anyone who wants to be a priest can't go near girls, and he has met one, and he's smitten by her, and they talk. They have it's kind of a strange way of communicating. She leaves a note in this apple tree in the orchard on the seminary land, and so he's losing a little sleep and kind of dreaming about her, and he's late for chapel, and the priest, the prefect is. He wants, the boys to figure out you have to be on time for things. So he has to wait until Father Gale lets him go to his pew. And while he's there, he prays, and there's a little, descriptors of the chapel and that sort of thing. And so after morning mass, Father Gale tells him that he needs to get more sleep, essentially. And Father Gale is interested in psychology. And so all of his conversations have these kind of obtuse psychological terms that the students sometimes understand and sometimes don't. And that's a little bit of comic relief in a sense, although the terms that he uses to reflect the circumstances are accurate psychological terms for the moments. But the boys they don't really want to talk to him about that. They're teenagers, and they're not interested in psychology as he is. So he thinks everything's good, and he won't have to go talk to Father Gale in his office. But after breakfast, one of the brothers talks to Father Gale, and he whispers in his ear, and then when Father Gale goes out of the refectory, he tells Morgan, "You need to see me in my office because his mother has come." And so the first chapter sets up the conflict of expectations outside of Morgan's control, both, say, from the church. Father Gale represents the church and the history and the hierarchy of that aspect, and his mom represents, his family and the psychosocial economic area that he's from. His parents are immigrants from Ireland, and they're poor. And so that's the main dynamic. Those are the four primary characters, with one other character, Father Christopher, who's Morgan's confessor and friend, and he is the one who actually invites Morgan into an understanding of mystical prayer and the composition and the composition of miracle and how one actually accesses the miraculous. So at the end of the mom comes and says, the girl Nadine has sent a postcard, a Christmas card, and so she doesn't want Morgan to hang around her anymore, and he promises not to, and then she thinks he ought to go to confession.
Yeah.
So Father Gale sends him off to confession, and he goes to see Father Christopher. And Father Christopher is he comes from a very wealthy family. He's a concert violinist. He was trained as a concert violinist, and in World War I, he decided he would leave his family's wealth and become a priest. Went into World War I and kind of learned that the only way to help some of the men who are in a battle position, the intimacy of the violence of war, was to go foxhole to foxhole and play his violin for him, because words can't fix that kind of insanity. And so he goes a little shell-shocked, as many people do when they go explore war. And he ends up a little bit nutty, and people are uncertain whether he's crazy or whether he's really a mystic, because he does have a weird connection to the Lord, and he has idiosyncrasies that are outside the norm, one would say. Yeah. So he spends most of his time in an old workshop that the early builders of the community made. They used to mine stone. They had a quarry, and this was their workshop, and they don't do that sort of stuff anymore. But Father Christopher, he likes to work with his hands and make things and repair things. So Morgan goes there to confess, and he tells Father Christopher that he's sinned because he's seen a woman, and Father Christopher tries to explain to him that there's a distinction in sinning and things that are a little bit past Morgan's comprehension at this stage. And so he tells him, okay, you're fine. Your sins are forgiven. And so Morgan says, great, but what's my penance? I need a penance. And so Father Christopher says, okay, well, your penance is you got to take care of the tree. They meet, Nadine and Morgan meet at this apple tree. So his penance is to take care of it, and he has no idea what that means. So he says, great, I'll do that later. I want to go back to see my mom. So he runs back. It's winter time. Of course, it opens in winter, so it's freezing. And he runs back to Father Gale's office, but his mother's already gone. And we sense from the scene what kind of consternation can happen with that absence of family and the intimacy of family. So it's a contradiction of entwinement, to love and miss and desire that intimacy, but to be away in a cloister, essentially. And he's too young to get that too, but he's missing his mom, and he's missing Nadine, and he takes a walk out in the snow and he lays down in it, and he kind of loses his self in an imagination experiment like Albert Einstein. He's trying to see his future, and it's not there, not clear. And so he sees his past. He reviews or remembers his first meeting with Nadine, and he he gets cold and he falls asleep, and he actually, is in danger from frostbite and whatever else.
Sure.
And his friend Peter DeFlavio finds him, and he says, "Hey, you missed school, and you're half frozen to death. We need to get you into the infirmary." So he takes him into the infirmary, and there's a brother who takes care of the kids, and they call it a doctor from the community. And the doctor says, "These kids study too hard. I've been telling Father Gale for years they need more rest. They don't get it." Kind of missing the actual circumstances. So he's shivering, and he's got chills inside his body. And Father Gale comes by and says, "I hope you're feeling better. We'll talk later." And then the next day, Father Christopher shows up, and he asks him how he's doing, and he talks to him about healing, and then he grabs his hand like around his wrist, and he shakes his arm real hard, and he lets go, and then he just stands there, and suddenly Morgan is healed. The cold goes away. His energy is back. He wants to eat 2 turkeys and run around the school 3 times. It's just a sudden resurrection of vitality.
Yep.
And so Father Christopher says, "Okay, great, see you later," and he walks out. And, he never tells Morgan anything straight. He always uses stories or explanations with his tools or his project. And the point of that, of course, is that we all have to make up our own minds about what we believe and how we, whether we have faith if we choose it, and what we do with it once we divine it. So he goes away, and Morgan's kind of puzzled by it, and so he showers and gets back in the daily routine. And on Saturdays, his work task is to go help Father Christopher out in the shop. So he goes out there, and he wants to know about this arm shaking thing and what he did. But Father Christopher, kind of brushes that off a little bit, and he says, "So go take care of your tree." And he explains to him how to prune a tree, a fruit tree. Gives him some pruning shears, gives him a shearing saw, explains to him how to observe a branch that will hold fruit, one that won't hold fruit, and so on. And he tells him, "Go make that tree, go attend to your tree." And so he does, and Father Christopher tells him, if you do that, if you take care of what's important to you, it will bear fruit, being a slight metaphor at the time. Yeah. And so Morgan said, "Yeah, okay, I'll go do that." And he heads on off, and he's figuring it out. And Nadine shows up and says, "What are you doing to our tree?" And so they talk a little bit, and Morgan says, "I can't tell you. It's a secret because it's from confession." And she hassles him a little bit, and he tells her, and he says, "Gee, I think I just sinned again because I don't think I'm supposed to tell what my penance is." Again, kind of indicating his immaturity or his youth or something. But anyway, they talk a little bit, and things are okay. And she goes away. He finishes the pruning, but she comes back because he's not real happy with the fact that he tells her he doesn't want to see her anymore, because that's what he told his mother. And so she says, "Okay," and then she steals the pruning shears. And so Morgan's not sure about that. He figures he's got to go tell Father Christopher, but he doesn't know what that's all about. And Father Christopher essentially says to him, "Don't sweat it. We'll see what happens." So it's Christmas time, and the kids get to go home for a week or so, and he goes home. And the Christmas experience, the Christmas chapter, I think, is a pivotal moment because it brings, I attempt in that chapter to bring into focus the relevance of community, the influence of family, and the circumstances of a priest in the community, or someone, even mythically, there has to be some, wizard or something, and the priest is the go-between. And Morgan's aunt explains to him that, these are poor immigrant men and women, and, they believe in God, but they're, the other side of the river are the wealthy people, the ones who own the mines. They work in the coal mines. And she explains to him that, they're little hills, and the sun rises in the east, and they live on the western bank, which means the sun hits the western bank before the eastern bank, and the people who have to go to work get up before the people on the other side where the sun comes. And in the evening, the sun sets in the west, which means it's darker on the west side, which they have to go to bed early, and the other side, with people with wealth and power, they get to stay up a little later and have a drink or something. So Morgan says, I didn't know God made 2 days, one for working people, one for rich people. And she says, well, it's a little more than that, actually. It's if these men don't have the courage to confront that kind of power, and that's a social, circumstance of probably ever since there were 2 caves, I guess. They also don't have the courage to, go to the power at the throne of God. They need an intercessory someone. Just like they have to learn someday to unionize, for example. They need a priest or a go-between. And that's what's important about him, because he feels isolated when he goes home. People treat him like he's already grown up, already ordained. He's different, and he feels ostracized and isolated. So one of the traditions of those families is on Christmas Eve after midnight mass, they all go visit each other for a Christmas drink. And as Morgan's father kind of puts it, they all tolerate inebriation for the sake of, social stability. But his mother won't let Morgan go. She says, you can't go, you're in the seminary. And he feels bad. So his sister, her sister, talks to her, and they're going to let him join they have a little Christmas ceremony of their own where they drink some whiskey and they smoke cigarettes. They only do it once a year. They do it on Christmas, and they're going to let Morgan join them. And he's astonished. He says, Mom, you're really going to let me do this, And she says, yeah, come on. So they're kind of, there's this, triumvirate, the 3 of them. The sister said, the aunt says, you're going to be a priest, but in order to know good, you have to know evil. So you've got to know what sin is before you can be a servant of the miraculous. And the mother says, well, he doesn't really need to know sin, he just needs to know about it. And they get into a little bit of a kind of a verbal argument and splitting philosophical hairs, I guess. And so then they drink, and Morgan smokes a cigarette, and or 2, I think, and he drinks whiskey, and they all 3 get drunk. And the mother's, the sister says, you'll be fine. You probably will make a good priest, but just keep in mind you're like a sacrificial lamb. And that's what Christ was. It's a difficult journey. And the mother gets upset with her, and she says, you got to stop telling him that kind of stuff. He's important. He's going to be a priest. Something special is going to. She believes it'll even raise their social status in the new country of America, where she feels the duplicity of poverty and wealth that's here, being immigrant. So they have a fight. And in the end, Morgan's mother slaps her sister. And Morgan has never seen his mother be violent in his life, and it just, of course, changes their whole experience, their whole relationship. And it leaves Morgan even more perplexed given the explanation of wealth and poverty that his aunt gave him and relating it to the relationship between humans and God and how to make that connection. So he tries, the next morning he tries to tell his father, but his father's a happy drunk and he loves his kids and he loves his wife, but he's not politically astute, and he is not greedy. He's a man who's happy with the blessings that he has and satisfied. And he tells Morgan, don't get involved in that situation. You know, your mother and your aunt are always at each other, and it's not healthy. And he tells him, the dad tells Morgan, I will never let anyone say anything against my wife. It's an awful, it's a bad position for you to be in, and your mother loves you, and let it go at that. Yeah. So this has left Morgan completely perplexed. He's got, he's in love, but he can't be, and he misses his family and his community of friends, and young people he went to school with, and that's all kind of changed, from what it used to be, because he's gone away. He's special now. Yeah. So he goes back to school, and he's just not sure what he's going to do. He's more homesick than ever when he gets back there, and so I have to catch up with myself here. I'm sorry.
Well, while you're doing that, I must say that I'm very impressed, because so much of this, it's almost like a practical application of some of the theology you must have learned in the seminary. I was just so impressed with the story about the sun rising differently on these basically two cities, even though they're not really two cities. I was also so impressed with the explanation of the aunt that he made people feel uncomfortable because they didn't want him to see them sinning. Yeah. And that he was like, well, I didn't know I made them uncomfortable. Because they make him uncomfortable, Right. And then just a few, I don't even think it's a couple of paragraphs, and you talk about, or you have Morgan talk about the feeling of aloneness or loneliness that he has. And I thought, really, this is an interesting reflection. It was to me anyway, an interesting reflection on what must be going on within the young seminarian as he's going through all the stuff of growing up into a man anyway, but he's also growing up into a man who is set aside for God. And I was really impressed with those few pages. I thought there was Catholic social teaching in there. There was some ecclesiology, and certainly something about how to form a priest. And it was really packed for me, those few pages, those few paragraphs. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's also a little bit of a foreshadowing, because at the end of the novel, Morgan tends toward the possibility of accepting that he may have a gift of healing. And when Father Christopher dies, he begins to raise him from the dead. And then he realizes that anyone who has that kind of power is going to get more ostracized. And so I can get to that, but yes, that is a similar...
So good, yes.
All right, so winter is ended, and he's back at the seminary, and he's told his mother that he will never see Nadine again. but he takes a walk up to the tree and he finds the shears and a note that says, I'm sorry, I took it. Do you want to come over and meet my parents? So he said, oh, no, what do I do? And, what he does, of course, is he goes to meet the parents. And the father and the mother, Nadine's mother doesn't play too much of a role. She likes Morgan. She thinks he's nice and polite. And the dad thinks, there's nothing wrong with him, but he's a Mick from, one of the small towns in Pennsylvania. And the mother and the daughter are shocked, and Morgan just looks at him. He says, well, it's nothing personal. It's just that, you Irish don't buy too many sports cars, because he owns an automotive dealership that sells imported sports cars. But the dad comes back into play later, when a little later. So they talk, and Morgan and Nadine finally leave, and then they have another talk that where they say, gee, it was nice to see you, and I don't know what we're going to do about not seeing each other, but I have to, and I have to see you. So he goes to talk to Father Christopher, and he tells Father Christopher he's in love, and he knows that's a sin. And Father Christopher asked me, he said, how can love be a sin if God is love? Then love can't be a sin. He said, but priests can't get married. And he said, what does marriage have to do with love? So again, he's starting to push Morgan towards some more mature reflection on what are valid concerns in our human journey. And so he's starting to teach Morgan a little through, as I say, he uses stories. And he's showing Morgan how to glass a hammerhead, a wooden hammer handle, into a hammerhead, and then he takes the hammer and he slams it on his thumb, and it bleeds real bad. And Morgan says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm trying to show you something, that when bad things happen, it feels good when they stop hurting." And so the cloth that Father Christopher puts around his thumb gets more and more red from the blood. And Morgan pulls it off there and wipes it clean and grabs it with his hand, and it stops bleeding. And Father Christopher says, well, have you ever done that before? Morgan says, what? What did I do? And he said, well, you made the bleeding stop. And he said, did I do that? And Father Christopher tells him, no, you didn't do that. God did it, but he used you as an instrument. And of course Morgan is now thinking, well, maybe everyone who says Father Christopher is crazy, or they're right. What is he even talking about? And Morgan doesn't quite get that, but it triggers for Father Christopher the suspicion that this particular young man might be open to divine influence, Holy Spirit, miracle. So he tells Morgan about the one woman he fell in love with. So this is how he explains to Morgan that marriage and love can be two different things, and that love, he tells Morgan that it was a long time ago, before he went off to the war and that sort of thing, and he's never seen the woman again. And Morgan says to him, well, you've loved her all this time? And Father Christopher tells him, well, love doesn't count years. Love endures, and that's how you know it's real. And so Morgan is, again, he's beginning to understand that love, human love, is a choice. This is some of what I think Jung talked about in the duality of human nature, light and dark, good and evil, man and woman, all those things, where God's love is absolute and unending and without any, it doesn't come with any, contractual exceptions. It's total and pure and ceaseless. where human love is we're capable of love, but we're also capable of hate. Part of that many dualities of being human. And Father Christopher trying to help Morgan understand love is a choice. And that a lot of things are a consequence of love. A lot of circumstances come about as a result of our ability to love. So he says, okay, you healed my finger. I'm going to give you a gift. And he teaches Morgan the gift of wind. And this is the first time they go down into the tunnel toward the old quarry. And that also is a little bit mythological in that they go into a cave, it's dark, and you have to go find the opening where, I've seen light kind of thing. And Father Christopher explains to him that there are powers that Satan can do, just like there's powers that Christ can do. And he tells him the difference is that the miracles of God heal and, bring peace and comfort, and the miracles of Satan hurt and destroy. This is more theological and a little bit beyond Morgan at the moment, but he has a series of emotional responses that begin to, lubricate his intellect, so that he's much more curious now, much more willing to explore the what is mystical. And so they come back, and it's the first sort of exploration of how to bring God's energy into the physical realm. And Morgan has to practice, and Father Christopher teaches him how to concentrate, and how to discipline his mind. And while he's out trying and learning and whatever, Peter de Flavio meets him when he's out practicing, and it's cold out, and so they decide to go have some cookies. And while they're sitting there, an ant shows up, and Peter takes the ant, picks it up, and pulls one of its legs off. And there's a scene there where he's kind of violent with this ant. And then he asks Morgan to tell him the worst thing that happened to him when he was a child, and Morgan has something that's not too complicated. And Peter tells him about a time his parents gave him a puppy. And he said the puppy, kept me up at night and whined a lot, so I broke its neck. And Morgan said, you killed it? And he said, no, I didn't kill it. I just broke its neck. It died on its own. And this, again, is a little foreshadowing, because Peter, Morgan thinks he's his best friend, and from Morgan's perspective, he is. But Peter is also narcissistic and prone toward violence. And later in the book, he and Morgan have some difficulties. So Morgan learns to deal with the wind and to kind of understand miracle, and then Father Christopher begins to teach him it's not, what gifts you get from the Lord, it's how you use them that are important. And so he's really now beginning to get Morgan into a sense of prayerfulness and willfulness that have to coalesce if miracle's going to start popping into your daily life. And so he goes up to the tree, and he finds a little bird, and he thinks that it's hurt, and so he heals it. He thinks he heals it, and it's a question of whether the bird was just a nestling and afraid and could fly anyway, or whether Morgan actually healed it. And there's a situation that it's questioning the validity of miracle. And so the same with Father Christopher, when Morgan finally figures out how to manage airflow in his own breathing. Father Christopher says, well, maybe it was the wind, maybe it was you. And he says, it's up to you to decide. In other words, again, faith is a choice, a willful choice. Right. So the next phase is the boys go off to their the summer before their senior year. They go to the novitiate, and before they go, Morgan and Nadine make love, and he they go past that boundary of liking each other and I don't know, so that extra liking, and they have a sexual relationship, and that is profoundly complex for Morgan, because he's going off to the novitiate for the summer to help make their final decision of whether they're going to go on to the major seminary and the priesthood, and whether he wants to choose a different path and marry Nadine and raise a family. So while they're there, that's what he's praying about. He's trying to figure it out. And the boys are all up at the novitiate. They follow the vow of silence, and they each have a job to do. They're Franciscans. And so Morgan learns how to make sandals. And even the novitiate master's impressed, because he's seen a lot of kids try to make sandals, and Morgan sort of has a knack. And that's from a combination of his just natural ability and Father Christopher's attention to detail in making things. And Morgan's learned how to focus and apply an intense willfulness to actions, which are required for, really important prayer. So Peter he's jealous. He's finally confessed to Morgan that, he cares about him and he loves him, and he tries to explain the different kinds of love there are in the world. And Morgan says, yeah, I love you too, Pete. You're my friend, and that's the way it goes. And Peter pushes it. And Peter essentially rapes Morgan, and that's another complexity. Peter tells Morgan, you got to know all kinds of love before you can know what love is the right love, because Morgan's struggling with whether he should leave the seminary or not the differences in how we express affection toward one another. So he doesn't know what to do. He feels bad, and Peter essentially gets in a fight with Father Gale, and so he leaves the seminary. And so Morgan goes back, and he's got to talk to Nadine and tell her he doesn't know who to talk to about this rape situation. He doesn't know how to feel. He feels guilty. He feels angry, all that stuff. And so he tells Nadine, and he says, I hope you won't not like me, but I got to tell you this thing. And she says to him, you call that rape? And then she explains to him that for a number of years, a couple of her cousins would take her out behind the barn when they visited her mother's sister on a farm, and the boys would take her out behind the barn, hold her down, and rape her and threaten her with that she better not ever tell anybody. And that went on for a couple of years, and when she was 15 years old, heading towards 16, she's had so much of it that she's depressed and she tries to commit suicide. But someone saves her and she doesn't commit suicide. And so finally she says, I've got to talk to somebody about this. But she felt like she couldn't tell her mother that it would feel bad saying, hey, Mom, your sister's, beautiful boys raped me. So she decided she's going to talk to her father. So she goes to where her dad is selling cars, and he's selling a car to somebody, and he sees her, and he says, "What do you want?" She says, I need to talk to you. And he says, "Okay, let me finish up, and we'll talk." And she said, something awful has happened, something sexual. And her dad says, "Okay, you don't need to say any more." And he tells her that he appreciates that she's kept the secret. Now, she doesn't know what he's talking about. So he tells her, that secretary doesn't work here anymore. It's the only time I was ever unfaithful to your mother. I know you saw it and you've kept quiet, so I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you this cute little sports car. He gives her a TR2, lime green. It's a beautiful little thing, and that's her reward for not telling on him. Yeah. So then she says to Morgan, "Well, I couldn't tell him, and so I've never told anybody, and you're the first person I told him. Now I feel bad because you won't like me because of that situation." So they have this shared experience that allows them to know each other better, but separates them. So it's just really weird, and Morgan decides, no, this is so important. It's just like a culmination of everything that's happened. So I'm leaving the seminary, and I'm going to marry you. And she doesn't say anything to him when he tells her this. He goes off to tell Father Christopher, and Father Christopher says, that's cool, but you'll have to decide that later. I got to show you something. And so Father Christopher has been waiting for God to give him a miracle. He wants the stigmata. And he has been trying to figure out whether Christ was nailed through the wrist or through the hands. Because the debate, right? Yeah. Biological debate. And so he's decided, Father Christopher has decided that Christ was nailed through the wrist. And he tells Morgan that that's why God hasn't given me the stigmata, because I wasn't sure where I was supposed to bleed from. And he shows him another way to fix a tool, and he explains what straight clawed hammers are, that they were kind of an evolution of the framing axe to a framing hammer. And then he slams the hammer, the sharpened claws of the hammer, into his wrist, and it cuts the artery, and it shocks him, and he dies. He has a heart attack and dies. So Morgan is panicked, doesn't know what to do. He tries to revive him. He gives him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but when someone dies, there's an expulsion of all ends of the body, to get rid of everything. That's the last aspect of vitality leaves the body, and he regurgitates up into Morgan's mouth. So Morgan has the taste of death on him. So now he knows what death is. Then he gets very calm. And he says, well, I'm a healer, and so Christ, rose himself from the dead, and he rose Lazarus, and Peter rose people from the dead when the Lord used him to do that. So the Lord can use me to raise Father Christopher. So he starts the prayer, but he stops it because he realizes what kind of power he might be unleashing if he actually submits his will that much to divine grace. And he just doesn't want to be ostracized again. And he feels it would ostracize him in a way that people would always come and want things from him, but nobody would ever come and give him anything. And what he's longing for, of course, is love, the intimacy, caring of another human being. And so he feels bad. He feels guilty that he didn't raise Father Christopher. So the next day or so, they're going to do the funeral, and Morgan meets Nadine and tells her, he feels bad, but he definitely is going to leave the seminary and marry her, and she's standoffish, and they sneak off to a place and go swimming. She's kind of distant. She's tender but distant. Her face is a little bit puffy, and she looks like maybe she hasn't slept, but she doesn't say anything to him. And So when he's getting ready for the funeral, he's in the chapel with Father Christopher's casket and all getting ready. And Peter DeFlavio shows up. He comes into the chapel and he tells Morgan that, no good deed goes unpunished, and I'll get even with you. And Morgan doesn't know what he's talking about, but Peter tells him, you're the reason I got kicked out. Why didn't you come and tell Father Gale, that I'm a good person and I could have stayed in school? Morgan tries to tell him nobody knew anything. All we had was a rumor, and we didn't see, and nobody knew nothing. But Peter says, okay, you tell what lies you want to, but you'll see. So they have the funeral, and on the way out, he notices his aunt and his mother on one side of the visiting pews, and Peter standing next to Nadine on the other side. So now he's totally bonkers. What are all these people doing at Father Christopher's funeral? So they have a little talk, and Nadine says, I have something to tell you, and Peter's been really wonderful. He loves you, and he's really your friend. And so they go have a talk, and she essentially and on the way out, while they're walking away so they can be private, Peter shouts out to Nadine, good luck telling Morgan about the baby. And so Morgan says, oh, well, cool, I'm going to be a dad. And Nadine says, no, stop. So he's excited. He wants to know about the baby. He's fine. He'll get a job. They'll make it. And he does a wonderful impersonation of a middle-class young man. But she says, no, there is no baby. Peter's been wonderful, and he took me to a place, there is no baby. And so Morgan has a moment of paternal loss. It's how does the man react to losing the baby, kind of thing. But she essentially says, deal with it, everything will be fine. Gets in her sports car and drives away. Morgan gets furious at Peter, and he actually grabs him, but he doesn't hurt him. He just pushes him away, and he goes off to Father Christopher's workshop because he doesn't know what else to do. So he falls asleep, and he's crying, and he's heartbroken. He's had a fight with his mother. He told her and his aunt to go away. Doesn't know what to do about going back home. Nadine is told him she's not going to marry him. There was a baby that he'll never see, only in his imagination. Peter DeFlavio has essentially, betrayed him, and Father Christopher's dead. So he's like,
not a good situation.
What happened? He needs some help. So he's hanging out, and he falls asleep, and a little while later he wakes up, and he hears a voice. He says, what are you doing? And it's the ghost of Father Christopher. He's come back. And so Father Christopher, Morgan says, did you come back to punish me because I didn't raise you from the dead? And he said, no, that you didn't hurt me at all. You helped me learn what the real gift from the Lord is. And he tells him, it wasn't the stigmata that the Lord wanted to give me. It was the people in my life that are the gifts, and in all of our lives are the other people the Lord brings to us. And so Morgan wants to know what to do. He says, you got to tell me what to do. And he says, I can't. You got to listen to the Lord. He's the one who's going to tell you what to do. Morgan doesn't know how to do that. And so Father Christopher starts to tell him a little about how to color a violin. It's a 2 or 3 year process, and he goes through each phase and explains to Morgan different things. But one of the pertinent beauties of it is that the person coloring the violin puts all the color in with his fingers and his hand, with the body oil and all that sort of stuff. So of course they're always tainted stains. So Morgan's trying to figure out, look, what am I going to do? What do I do with the rest of my life? Father Christopher's brushing him off and not really answering his questions, and in the process he's telling this story. That's how he teaches Morgan. So Morgan finally says, what are you trying to tell me? And so Father Christopher says, okay, what you love stains you. And so that's, the sense that when we love unconditionally, we have to deal with all the consequences of other as well as self, and it's complicated. And so Morgan says, well, that doesn't help me, and Father Christopher tries to tell me you have to listen to the Lord. He will talk to you, but you have to get quiet, you have to focus. He teaches them mystical prayer, essentially. And so he says, here, I'm going to leave you with a gift because I'm not going to be able to get back here very soon. So hang out with this and see what happens. And he goes into a mystical moment, and he has this experience of seeing two boys who are obviously starving. And then he feels this tremendous compassion for them. He doesn't know what's driving it or what's allowing it, but the next thing he's on the cross with Christ, and he feels all of the lashes and the crown of thorns and the nails without pain, but he knows them all through this moment. In that moment of recognition, he feels the Lord's love for these two boys, the unconditional love of God, what that is like. It's just this moment of divine connection to a loving, healing God. And then it's over. So he goes outside and he tells Father Gale is there, and they talk a little bit. They go have cookies and milk. And when Peter got violent with Father Gale again, he broke his arm. So when Morgan is leaving, he tells Father Gale, look, it's better for me to go out and bring miracle into the world than to stay in a cloister. It's not where I belong. Other people belong here, but not me. That doesn't mean there won't be miracle in my life. It has to come different for us, some of us. And so before he leaves, he holds Father Gale's arm, and he puts his hand on it, and he heals the broken arm. And he walks off into his future, and that's the story.
Yeah. Boy. You are a master storyteller.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you.
That's beautiful. It is such a beautiful story. So, very impressive. You must have received a lot of training to write like that.
Well, I like Thomas Merton and Thomas Aquinas, and we do have the gift of text, and it's a wonder. The miraculous in our tradition is profound and long. And I don't think it's dead. I think it's alive and well. It's just a little quiet.
Oh yeah.
So that's the whole that's the intent of the book.
Well, it's a beautiful story. I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed hearing you tell me about it or tell our audience about it. Very impressive. So for our listeners, I would say that if you have the interest to read a beautiful novel, to buy The Children of Slate. And Thom, I want to thank you for letting me interview. It was a very good experience for me.
And for me too, Cynthia. I appreciate your time and your compliments, and thank you very much. It really, really a joy for me as well. God bless you.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, all right.
Would you like to close us with a prayer?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to. Lord, we ask you to reveal yourself to us just a little bit more each day, that we may come to know and trust your will and do your will in all things, great and small. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Thom.
You're very welcome, and thank you, Cynthia. Bye-bye.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.